The high street, easily, if not one of probably the key centres and economic areas of any town, village, city. That's where people go. It's where all the action is. However, our high streets have had an incredibly hard past couple of years. You know, 2020 was very hard, and 2021 has been just as, if not even harder. And our illustrious government can't even seem to recognize the fact that maybe these high streets maybe need some more help. Maybe, can have some bit of help, extra support. No, not one piece of help is even offered or even given. And it doesn't just stop there at a national government. It also goes to like a local government as well. And while most local councils have indeed recognized the help and support that local businesses in the high street do need, eventually they have to go cap in hand to the central government. And because we've got a central government who's just gone like that wherever they come, it does create even more harder situations for them. It's quite funny, of course, because again, when we were in the EU, there was a specific fund that, again, local councils could have access to for just this very type of thing. But of course, we ain't in the EU anymore, so councils are now on their own. As I've said before, there are numerous pots of money that local councils had access to for when we were members of the European Union that they do not have now. And this is going to cause ever increasing problems for many of these councils. So, as always, before we do go diving into our local high streets and how we can indeed help them out in this trying time for them, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can always, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for all those people who do help support the channel that way. So, on with the show. So, this comes from the Yorkshire Bylines with the title of Failing High Streets Need Long-Term Help and Support. The high streets in the city and town centres of Great Britain lost on average 28 weeks of sales between March of 2020 and September of 2021, according to a report by the Centre for Cities on Monday. The Cities Outlook of 2022 report has taken a deep dive into the state of British high streets, evaluating the impact of both COVID, both long and short term, of Britain's 26 largest towns and city centres. Some places have entered the pandemic in a pretty bad shape. In Bradford, Blackpool, and Newport, the vacancy rate for high street property was already at least 30% of all units. In the short term, COVID-19 has turned the performance of high street and centres in Britain's cities and large towns on its head. Economically strong places were the hardest hit by losing the most weeks of sales, while weaker places were still less affected by lockdown restrictions. Central London has been hardest hit. Between March of 2020 and September of 2021, it lost the equivalent of 47 weeks, almost a year's worth of sales. And here in Yorkshire, Leeds lost 39 weeks in that very same period. Sheffield, 31 weeks, Bradford, 29 weeks in loss of sales. That is noticeable through the variation between places, with Huddersfield and Wakefield town centres losing only 12 and 13 weeks respectively. This is hardly surprising. Cities with significant numbers of professionals and office-based jobs suddenly saw their footfall drop away, with the effective retailers in hospitality especially affected. No office workers shopping at lunchtime to get a sandwich or that sneaky beer after work. The professional classes were spending their time in their bedrooms shopping online, denying city retailers the skilled workforces proportionately to even splash its cash. And of course, people also couldn't move around. Local shopping centres, often deemed as the weaker, benefited from the lockdown, with more people spending more time locally rather than the city centres. And the underperformance of large cities, according to the report, accounts for a significant share of the overall underperformance in almost all lagging regions. For example, in North East, Newcastle is responsible for at least 92% of the wider region's underperformance. If the pandemic has indeed triggered a long-term shift in behaviour, this impact could become permanent. However, early signs do suggest that the cities have been been largely economically stronger and more affluent, will eventually recover more quickly. Sadly, the less prosperous places will be hit with each wave of closures. Successful cities have produced skilled, high paying jobs in sectors such as financial services. They will be bringing their purchasing power back to the high street. And places such as Blackpool or Hull, where there is a lack of high skilled jobs, come back post pandemic in a very different place. And of course, it is true that the emergency support for business appears to have cushioned some places from very significant damage. Strongly performing places such as London, Slough, and Cambridge benefited more in the monetary terms from the Chancellor's holiday rates, but other government grants helped weaker places where the money was stretched further. But this seems to have just delayed the inevitable. Andrew Carter, the chief executive for the Centre of Cities, speaking to the Yorkshire Post, said this: "The bigger concern is for the economically weak places, primarily in the North and the Midlands, where the pandemic has actually paused their long-term decline. To help them avoid a very high wave of street closures this year, the government must set out how it plans to help increase people's skills and pay to give them the income needed to sustain a thriving high street. The future success of high streets is very much still dependent on the same things pre-pandemic. The need for levelling up locally and regionally and better paid jobs in towns and cities that have weaker economies." The Centre for Cities reports also notes that employee footfall is still more than 30% below pre-pandemic levels. This also affects spending. Factor into that an already weaker city centres like Bradford, where 27.6% of all its units are shown to be vacant, then it's clear that they start in a recovery far worse off than places like York, where it's just 11.4% vacancy rate. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, speaking to City Outlook's 2022 launch on Monday, said this: "The benefits of being close to a successful city and emerging around Manchester. Take Stockport, for example. It's like Brooklyn to Manhattan. Stockport is 10 minutes away from Manchester. Look at Rochdale. There are big changes happening, linking to connectivity and transport links. Change is eventually starting to happen. It is evident, though, that some places are just going to become left behind unless there are indeed some long-term strategies put into place. Much does now rest on the highly anticipated Levelling Up white paper, already overdue. And as ever, this will come down to how much money the government can find or is even willing to find to actually support this." Last week's IPPR report does highlight the gap between the promises and reality on levelling up. And as I wrote last week, the 2021 allocation for the Levelling Up Fund was an investment of just £32 per person in the North, against an actual drop in council tax rate spending of £430 per person over the last decade. Yet, the report does note that the High Street is likely to perform a very significant part of the Levelling Up strand that the government has termed the pride of place. As Burnham said, "I hope the government gets behind Gove and hopes that the white paper does put some energy into this. We can't keep firing on one cylinder called London and the South East. We need to free up other places, especially around the North." Or, as Carter told the Yorkshire Post, "Many of these places are in the so-called Red Wall, so there is important political imperative for the government to act fast as well as an economic one." And we are just going to have to wait and see what happens. Like I say, this very much vaunted Levelling Up white paper has been delayed at least twice now. Again, something that was vaunted just a couple of weeks ago as part of Operation Red Meat. Wait for the white paper on Levelling Up to come out. It's going to solve all the problems and hopefully distract from what's going on at the parties in 10 Downing Street. But of course, as we've covered before, you need to put the money in. If they do not put the money in, how is this going to help these towns and cities? So far, the Levelling Up money that has been promised comes to about £32 per person, which is nothing compared to when you look at local council tax spending over the past decade, which amounts to about £413 per person. That's local economies not being able to invest in their local towns. And again, having to rely on EU funding, which we've talked about before. Austerity was so much responsible, and again, the Tories so much responsible for all these places really becoming even more left behind than they were. And again, how they intend to get themselves out of this without spending money, well, that's anyone's guess. And like I say, as always, we are indeed waiting on that white paper. And don't worry, we will have a very, very good look at it when it does come out. But as always, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way, as well as the YouTube memberships down below as well. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.